Welcome to episode 3 of Let's Talk Debt. So, in this episode, we're going to take a little bit of a different path, and instead of talking about specific definitions, more basic points of debt and understanding it in regards to personal finance, we're going to go over an article that I recently read from the Motley Fool entitled 7 Debt Facts That May Surprise You. If you'd like to read along what I'm referencing, feel free to type in exactly that 7 debt facts that may surprise you into Google or click on it in the link below. So let's get right into it. This is an article written by Lyle Daly, or Daly, not sure how that's exactly pronounced, from the Motley Fool. I will say, as far as the source goes, Motley Fool and their subsidiaries are definitely kind of mixed in my experience. They have some good stuff, but they also have a lot of literature. They have a lot of articles that are put out to try to sell their products and services. So you got to watch out for that kind of stuff. So I'm going to hit the main points within the article, and from there give you some feedback, my opinion. This article definitely goes into a lot more detail on some of the other side effects on debt that aren't just financial, and how we as consumers and people that interact with debt have to deal with those. So number 1, medical debt has the biggest effect on people's life satisfaction. That I can definitely understand. It says here they did some research on the psychological cost of debt. An average of 83% of those without debt were satisfied with life compared to 70% of those with medical debt. And then they go further and say only 64% of people with medical debt express satisfaction with their lives. So on the top, those first 2 numbers are just debt in general. So you go from having a 70% reported rate of satisfaction with your life if you have debt, so you lose 13% if you have any kind of debt, and then you drop another 6% if you have medical debt, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but that's really big. You take another 6% of people that responded to the study that they're referencing here that report that they're not satisfied with their lives because of medical debt. And it notes there as well, this is lower than any other type of debt, which I can understand in an intuitive sense. So if you owe debt off of medical expenses for yourself or for someone that's in your family, I'm sure that can be pretty traumatic because you have that thought in the back of your head, man, like I couldn't even afford to cover the cost of this life-saving procedure that I needed, that someone I care about needed. And I can definitely see how that causes a lot more pain, especially self-reported life satisfaction, which is probably a hard metric to calculate, and I'd be curious to delve into their numbers to see how those questions were asked, because that's, again, it's depending on how you word it, I could see different responses there. But they do compare in point 1 on medical debt, 86% of those with mortgages said they were satisfied with their lives, which I'm going to get to in a minute. There's definitely a big range of people that are happy with the debt they have and not happy. And this is probably going to be a topic for a later video where I go over the main points that you need to look at when you're deciding whether or not to get into debt. The satisfaction that people are reporting with their lives when it comes to, I have this type of debt and I'm yay happy with my life, definitely should play into your thinking of whether or not you're going to make a certain purchase or go into debt for a certain expense. Okay, point number 2, over half of those in debt are ashamed of it. From my personal experience, I can definitely see that. Again, it depends on the type of debt. Mortgages, like they just referenced, pretty much everyone with a mortgage says they're pretty happy with their life. You do have exceptions, but that's when you never really hear people talk about like, oh man, I'm ashamed that I'm a homeowner and I have a mortgage. You tend to see, and exactly what number 2 is showing us if you look at the percentages there, those with medical debt are the highest people that are shamed. So not only do you report lower life satisfaction with medical debt, you also report, it's number 1 for people that are reporting that they're ashamed of the type of debt they have. So that might also strike a vein too of why you see a lot of people that get really fired up when it comes to debt and trying to make a lot of those medical expenses public, like making our healthcare system into a more public system versus more of a private system that it is now. So in number 2, you just get a general breakdown of the different kinds of debt and the different ashamedness score that they got from their data. So you have medical debt. 76% of people with medical debt are ashamed. Personal loans, that's 71%. That would include student loans. Credit cards, 69%, which is kind of crazy to me that people are more. So personal loans would include student loans, but there are other ones in there. So I would guess if you just parsed out the student loans, that would be lower. Because generally people are less ashamed of student loans than they would credit cards. Auto loans are up there. Again, mortgages all the way towards the bottom of people that are ashamed. Number 3, and this one really surprised me, millennials have the lowest average credit card debt. And again, this article isn't 100% up to today in its data set that they looked at, but it still surprises me. So there's a lot of things that get thrown around about millennials being really bad with money and not knowing what they're doing with money. So having the lowest average credit card debt was definitely surprising. And if you scroll down, you can see that it's the last paragraph at the bottom there. Average amount of credit card debt for millennials is $5,453, whereas Gen X is $6,627, and baby boomers have an average of $6,800, which is pretty crazy because you'd think as people go through the life cycle, like you go from a point where you're starting out, you're going to have probably the most expenses of your life when it comes to like funding education. That's when a lot of people get into credit card debt. And you're going to be starting out in your field at the lowest income earning potential of any point in your career. Over the course of time, you're going to see that you're going to start out more of an entry-level position in your field, and over time you're going to tick up and up and up and up, and then people more or less level out when they are in the middle of their career, like 40s, 50s. They hit those peak earning years. So you'd think a lot of people that are in those later generations, Gen X, that are in those peak earning years of their careers would actually have lower credit card debt. So this one definitely surprises me. And I'm definitely going to have to dig more into and probably talk about this one in another video of why this older generation, again, millennials, go all the way up to, I believe it's 35 today. Depending on what you look at, some of the time they cut it up differently by ages. So Gen X would be people in their 40s and 50s. So that definitely surprises me. What shocks me even more is baby boomers. I mean, if you're in the baby boomer generation, you're like right at the edge of like, you're in those peak earning years of your career all the way to like into retirement. Like having credit card debt in retirement is crazy. Again, it shows kind of the retirement crisis that we have in America too, that people are way behind in their savings where they should be. So I will definitely have to look at where the Gen X and baby boomer debt is coming from, because it was definitely a shock that millennials actually have lower credit card debt. My guess would be millennials are just better educated when it comes to personal finance. There's a lot more materials coming our way, and a lot of the metrics I've seen, millennials are actually pretty financially savvy compared to previous generations. They've more or less had to be by necessity because they have a lot more difficulties in some parts when you look at how expensive a lot of goods are, especially the big two, housing and education, compared to what they were for Gen X and the baby boomer generation. Oh, right. Off to number 4. Consumers who get their first credit card when they're between 21 and 24 accumulate the most credit card debt. So I can go back to my time in college and even today. So right now I am 24. My wife and I probably get 2 to 3 credit card offers per week. I don't know how they have my information. It's really followed me. So even way back in college, so probably from the time I was 17, 18 through today, the last 6 years, probably pretty consistently I've gotten probably a credit card offer every week to 2 weeks during that period of time, which shows you, doesn't show you anything else, it shows you the crazy amount of money that credit card companies make if they can afford to mail you offers that frequently over time. So on this point, consumers who get their first credit card when they're between 21 and 24 accumulate the most credit card debt. the biggest thing with that is the reason that they're spending so much money marketing credit cards to younger people is because they're vulnerable. I mean, at 21 to 24, you're not fully educated on, in most cases, what a credit card really is, how bad they are when it comes to how high their interest rates are, and the different binds that you can get into if you're not really paying attention, not careful with the credit card. You're also at the point in life where you're most likely not disciplined with your spending and budgeting because you haven't had a ton of life experience to track your spending, maintain good savings accounts, and things like that. So it's kind of one leads to the other in that credit card companies know that young people are a vulnerable population, and they know that if they spend their marketing dollars sending all these credit card offers to kids, that they're going to actually use them. Okay, number 5. The average couple doesn't reveal debts until 10 months into the relationship. This one was interesting. I had no real preconceptions on this one, and I'll read a little bit more into this. So, they looked at the financial timeline of relationships and found that the average couple didn't reveal how much debt they had until about the 10-month mark. And then it has a funny sentence there. That's later than the first holiday together, the first I love you, and the meeting of parents. Now, I'm not saying that's like a first date topic of like how much debt you have, but definitely should probably come before meeting the parents at least. And I will say that's something that's, when you look at debt, a lot of it isn't in the numbers, a lot of it is in our relationships, a lot of it is in the amount of stress that we have with some of those other topics in this article. 10 months is a long time. And it's like anything else. Any sort of relationship, I mean, if you look at two companies that are doing business together, you better be darn sure that things aren't going to go well. They're not going to have a long-term relationship if they find out that one party has been hiding a lot of debt from the other. Very similar to how traditional relationships work. That one specifically reminded me of a scene from The Big Short where, I forget his name, it's the character that's played by Christian Bale, talks about how he met his wife, and he had a post on one of the dating websites that said, I'm a med student with $200,000 of student loan debt, one eye, and an awkward social manner. And he said that his wife was like, typed back like, you're exactly what I'm looking for, someone that's honest. So definitely a red flag if you have a partner or someone that you think might be your partner that's not talking to you about how much debt they actually have. Okay, number 6. Almost a quarter of men and women have hidden debt or lied about having it to a partner. That's pretty big. Again, finances are the number one cause of divorce. One of the terms, and they reference it here, is called financial infidelity. Spouses hiding debts from each other, and I've heard of a lot of really, really bad horror stories about spouses that hide large amounts of debt or take out debts in the other person's name and do all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Definitely not a great place to be, and it's crazy that it's that high. So say almost a quarter, so right there they have 22% of men and 24% of women admitted to doing this. So it was actually slightly higher on the women's side, which I wouldn't have expected. I would have guessed that it would have been slightly higher on the men's side. But definitely a big problem. And number 7, 20% of people believe they're middle class if you have no more than $5,000 in debt. This one I don't really think is that big of a deal. Again, there's a lot of ways that you can cut up like who's middle class, who's not middle class. So 20% of people believe you're in the middle class if you have no more than $5,000 in debt. You could be in the top 1% and have no debt. You could be really poor, have a lot of debt. You could be in the top 1% and have a lot of debt. And then it notes there are all kinds of ways that Americans define the middle class. The common is being able to pay bills on time, followed closely by having a secure job. And this is self-reported. Like when they survey people, what are the top things you believe puts you in the middle class? And one of the more surprising traits that they found was the middle class was having no more than 5,000 in debt. Approximately 20% felt that this was a marker of being middle class, and an additional 7.5% felt being middle class meant not having any debt at all. So I don't understand why they put this one in here. It doesn't really tell us a lot. I mean, it says most people don't think that having 5,000 in debt is characteristic of being middle class. So this, just cross out 0.7 for trying to get value out of this article. It doesn't really make any sense. And then they have some other information there. Again, I'm always a little leery with sources from Motley Fool because you can see in the latter half of that article they are trying to sell you on some stuff. And they do generate revenue from referring you to credit cards and things like that. So I would say points 1 to 6, definitely interesting. Definitely a few things that I'll have to do some more research on and go a little deeper on how they came up with these numbers and some of the more psychological impacts of having debt. I think that was probably the biggest takeaway for me on this article is it's really interesting to look at life satisfaction. So not only are a lot of the pieces and different types of debt that they talk about in this article better decisions than others, but there, at least on the surface, seems to me like there's a link between, oh, this type of debt's a good idea versus this kind of debt, and your self-reported feeling on how much you value your quality of life and how ashamed of it you are down the road. Okay, so as always, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them below. Any recommendations on future video topics, I'm going to try to sprinkle in. I think this content's a little more on the fun side. Try to keep things a little more entertaining and less dry on definitions. So again, if you have any recommendations on videos, feel free to leave those in the comments. And with that, thank you for watching episode 3 of Let's Talk Debt.